Hello there and welcome. It's Jennifer and I'm glad you're here. Today I'm sharing how to create a wreath on your card. Now my card examples today are holiday wreaths. However, you could do a spring or summer wreath simply by changing up some of the products that you use. I have some tips for you that I hope make the process easier, and it really creates a stunning card in the end. I will even talk about using unexpected products to create the wreath. All right, let's get started with this first example. We need to do our background first. For the background, I'm using one of my favorite new products from Simon Says Stamp, the Winter Celebration Plate. I used this in my previous video. I encourage you to check it out. I have a piece of white cardstock where I have placed Altenew double-sided adhesive on the back of it. I ran it through my die cut machine, and you can see all the pieces stay in place and they all have adhesive on the back. So I will remove the release paper and put this onto the front of a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch note card. And it looks like I inlaid all these pieces, but really they all kind of stuck there. Now I could have popped the pieces out if I wanted to, but because of that adhesive on the back, it leaves it in place long enough for me to put it all down together, and it creates a cool background. I then have a circle die. This is the key to forming a wreath. You need a circle die, a cup, a mug, a bowl, anything that you have on hand. And you want to trace that. This one's about 3 inches in diameter. But really, look around your house. You can find lots of things you can trace. For this particular card, I'll start with that circle right there at the top center. I'm using the Simon Says Stamp Charming Berry Branch. This one works really well for a wreath and creates one very quickly because it has a curve to it. But you'll see I'll be using non-curved foliage later in this video. I did die cut this twice from 3 different colors of green cardstock. This is an excellent way to use up scraps. I'm starting out by placing my first die cut along that pencil curve, so I will cover up that pencil line. Then I'll put the next die cut tucked behind it. Notice that I put the liquid adhesive along the back center only. I don't have any on the leaves. That's because I want to add some dimension behind them later on, but you could glue them flat if you prefer. And I'm just making sure that these overlap so that you have a continuous wreath look. And then after I've glued them all down, look at this great wreath. You could leave it as is, or you could add more die cuts to fill it out a bit. What I decided to do was cut a few more die cuts and then just tear a little leaf off of those die cuts and tuck them into some of the gaps. I like my wreaths to be very full, but as you see, you could leave it as is and just add some berries. Now I'm making this a holiday card, so I'll add red berries in a moment, but you could add little pink flowers or little yellow flowers and make this a wreath for all year round. You'll notice that I'm using very little liquid adhesive. Because I'm doing so, I'm using a liquid adhesive that I know is very strong and that I trust, and this is Gina K Connect in a fine tip bottle. If you're using a tiny bit of adhesive, make sure it is one that is strong. Okay, so you can see how I just tucked a single leaf into that wreath just to make it fill out a bit more. Now you could use tiny little circle die cuts for the berries, but I thought it'd be fun to use some glitter drops. These are from Pink Fresh Studio. You could use any kind of gem, any kind of sequin, or even like Nuvo drops for this. You could also die cut tiny little circles from a glitter cardstock, and that would look great too. However, I thought using these glitter drops would be the fastest. For a sentiment, I'm using the new Simon Says Stamp Holiday Duo die set. This has the words Merry and Joy, along with a shadow die for each. I die cut the word Merry from a glitter cardstock from Altenew called Smoky Quartz. It's not as yellow as most golds, and I absolutely love it. It's a nice kind of in-between gold and silver. I put glue on the back of that, and I'm adding it to the white shadow die cut. I did stack a few die cuts for these, so it would be nice and strong. I did cut the extension of the Y off of the glitter die cut, and now I'm cutting off the shadow so that it fits nicely at the center of our wreath. Now this next step is absolutely optional, but I like to take the tip of a craft knife and pierce the side of a little foam tape, this is a little foam circle, and then place it underneath some of those leaves. By doing this on some of the leaves, it creates some dimension that looks really amazing, but if you prefer not to have that added dimension, you could definitely just leave the leaves as is or put liquid adhesive behind them to secure them better. So I feel like this card shows that creating a wreath card doesn't have to take long. And no one would ever know that you had this single leaf die to create this. So you can look through your stash and see if you have something similar, but I thought this die worked perfect to create a fun wreath. Okay, let's move on to the next example. This one was actually a bit quicker to make because I used a die set that had a bunch of different foliage dies in it, and I layered them all together. I also created a fun bow to add to it, just showing you a different way you can create a wreath. This is the Simon Says Stamp Ho Ho Holiday Greens die set. Now it has lots of dies included in it, but I only used a few of them for today's example. I'm also using the Simon Says Stamp Loopy Bow Die. That will get added on to our wreath in the end. I have a large circle die here that I will trace, and at this point I'm trying to figure out where I want to put it on the front of my card. I first used an embossing folder on the background of our card. This is a Simon Says Stamp embossing folder. It's an older one, but one that I reach for often. I used it in my last video too. I decided to trace that circle die towards the top left corner, so we're only showing part of the wreath on the front of our A2 card panel. I'm taping the die on the back of the card panel also just to make sure that as I'm forming this wreath, I don't go kind of wonky. It's nice to have that visual circle. So I have a bunch of die cuts that I created using that Holiday Greens die set that you see on the left. And I cut them from 3 shades of green cardstock. So I used the handful of foliage dies from the set, and I cut twice from each color green, so 6 passes through the die cut machine, which really isn't much for a die cut card with this much on it. And you can see how I'm gluing them down again to follow that pencil curve line that we traced, just like we did in the last example. This time I had enough die cuts that I could layer up this first style of foliage die cut. And you can see I'm kind of alternating between the different colors of green. Now on top of that, I'm switching to another style of die cut. This is the one that looks like evergreen. And I'm gluing this along the curve, but you can see how I'm letting the tip kind of stick out either to the inside of the curve or to the outside of the curve, just to make that wreath a little more full looking. So the base, I followed the curve. The rest of it, I kind of just glue down to angle in whatever way needs to be done to fill in that space. Now I'm going with the third layer on this wreath, and I'm adding that. It's a different style of the leaves, and I'm adding that right on top. And then I'm just kind of filling in the spaces with this small leaf die cuts. At this point, I was pretty happy with the results. So all of that leftover die cutting at the top, I just left for another project. So you really don't need as much as you think you need. And look how full and beautiful that is, just by layering up the different kind of die cuts. Now this die set had lots of different ones together in one die set, but you could instead look in your stash and pick different leaf dies that you have and layer them together. Now I'm using the Altenew Smoky Quartz glitter cardstock, and I die cut the bow from Simon Says Stamp. You can see what it's supposed to look like up on the top right, but I cut extra loops that I glued together so that I would have a much bigger bow to put on this wreath. At this point, I have 2 loops on the left, 2 loops on the right, but I do go back and add another loop on each side. And then we can have this little bit of the trail of the ribbon coming down on the left and the right. I think that by using glitter cardstock, this really stands out against that wreath. At this point, I'm adding those extra loops. So I have 3 loops on the left and 3 loops on the right. You can see how this bow is very full compared to the one that's on the package that you see up in the top right. So you can really change up that bow die set by adding the additional layers to it. It didn't take too long to do anyways. Now at this point, I could add little gemstones for the berries or little circle die cuts, but I thought the little floral die cut was fun. You can see that floral die up on the top of the screen there. I cut that from white cardstock, and I'd used the smaller of the flowers and scattered them on the wreath. And then I added a tiny little circle die cut with that same Smoky Quartz glitter cardstock to the center of those flowers. So even though there's little white flowers on this, I feel it works for a holiday card regardless. And you can see I used a holiday greeting there at the top center of that wreath. That holiday greeting is gold glitter heat embossed, so it matches that bow nicely. Now keep in mind, if you have different kind of leaf die cuts in your collection, even those that don't look very holiday-ish, you could use it to create a holiday wreath. And you can see I have lots of die cuts left over for another card. By the way, that sentiment is from the new Simon Says Stamp CZ Design Inside Holiday Greeting stamp set, and there is a coordinating die set available. I love these sentiments because they can be used on the front or the inside of a card, and I used it in my last video also. Now it's time for our next example. This one uses non-leaf die cuts to form a wreath. This is the Simon Says Stamp Intricate Bottle Brush Tree die set. It creates 2 layered trees, one bigger and one smaller. And I'll use those dies to create a wreath. Now for the background, I use the Simon Says Stamp Modern Loop Embossing folder. I really like the style of this. It works with a lot of different cards, and I used it in my last video. This is a 4 1/4 panel once again, and I have another circle die here. This one's about 4 inches in diameter. And I'm putting it towards the top left corner and tracing on the inside with a pencil. You could use a pen here if you want to see it better because you'll cover everything up. Once again, I'm putting strong liquid adhesive just down the center of these trees and gluing them directly onto that pencil line. So you can see I'm curving the trees so no one will ever know I used tree die cuts here. So I encourage you to look at your stash and see what you can use to kind of curve along a circle to form a wreath. If you don't have anything like this, try taking individual floral dies or individual leaf dies and just putting a bunch of them along the circle, and you can form a wreath that way. You could even use circle die cuts of different sizes and create an ornament, like what would look like an ornament wreath. Lots of things you can do to form a wreath. All right, so here I am layering up a second layer of those tree die cuts, and then I decided to come in with little pieces for the third layer, just kind of filling out that wreath and making it look a little more full. Keep in mind, you can use a lot less die cuts than I use because I really like a lot of layers and really like the wreath full, but you could keep it simple if you wanted to. Off screen, I created a little bird to sit inside of our wreath. This is the new Simon Says Stamp Beautiful Cardinal die set. Now I'm trimming off the excess of our little wreath, and you can see my little bird here that I am ready to add onto my card. I'll put him towards the bottom there of our wreath, and I have room for the All is Calm, All is Bright sentiment. That's from the same stamp set that I showed you earlier. I did add a few little gold gemstones on the wreath just for a little bit of shine, but I decided not to do red this time so that the bird would stand out even more. Now remember, you could do non-holiday cards with wreaths. You could just take a bunch of flower die cuts and form them into a wreath. You could just do a foliage wreath and add little bright flowers. The sky is the limit with this fun technique. I hope you'll give it a try. If you're interested in the supplies I used, I always have them linked in the YouTube description below. And at the end, I'll link to a couple other related videos where I did similar techniques in case you're looking for some more ideas. I appreciate you spending this time with me. I hope you will come back for another video, and I'll see you then.